Well, good morning. Our theme today is Pray for Peace, and this feels especially timely in our world today where peace is in such short supply. But this morning is also Heritage Day, and that's a day we look back to remember the people and the stories that helped form us as a community of faith. And I think I can tie those two together, and you can grade me at the end and figure out whether I pulled that off or not. When we talk about heritage, we're usually talking about people from the past. Often we talk about our own relatives, but I'm not going to go that direction today about my ancestors or any of that. We talk about ordinary people and men and women who shape the places we live, the church we belong to, and even the way we think about God. Today, I want to tell you about a man who few of us, I think, know much about, and those of us that have heard of him probably don't know the full extent of how he formed and his impact on this place and on our lives and on our church and on our town. His name is Elijah Banta. This is the part where I got to, here we go. Yeah, just have to hit the right buttons. Okay, it's up there. I've got to move a few things around on my screen, so. This is Elijah Banta, born in 1823. Alma Blair, the late Alma Blair, referred to Elijah Banta as the closest thing we have to calling somebody the father of Lamoni. And it's not a name we're familiar with. It goes far enough back. Today, if you were to say, who are the stalwart people of Lamoni, you'd probably come up with names like the Boswells or the Sneathens. 150 years from now, somebody might go, Sneathen? That's an odd name. Well, Banta is the odd name for us today, but he was central in at that time. So, before we get into the actual story of who he was and when he got involved in our town's story, let's take a look at what brought him here, what got him into, before he even joined the church and came to Lamoni. He was born in Kentucky, the 9th of 10 children. His mother died when he was only 6, and that made for a hard life. His father moved the family to Indiana to work a big farm, and it was hard labor for a little child because he was required to do all the farming that everybody else needed to do. So it was tough times. At some point, when he's about 21 years old, he got introduced to the Latter-day Saint movement. This is our founder, Joseph Smith Jr., had just been assassinated, so he joined after all that. There was a lot of chaos and turmoil, but he got to meet the group, a follower of Sidney Rigdon, who took a group out to Ohio. And Sidney Rigdon, at one time when he was younger, was a charismatic figure, I think in the Methodist Church, and then he joined and became one of the counselors to Joseph Smith. So in his time, he was charismatic, but he was getting up in the age at this point. But anyway, he went out to East, followed Sidney Rigdon, his headquarters in Ohio, and while he was there, he also met his wife, and got married in 1846. He stumbled around trying to find jobs and did many different things, iron worker, lumberjack, coal miner, and eventually his dad got sick and he needed to go back and run the farm back in Indiana. So he became a farmer again and kind of running the family estate. By that time he had lost some of his charm, or he got disillusioned with the Latter-day Saint movement. It wasn't, even though he was really totally all in with the Book of Mormon and the mission, the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that brought him into that. He just didn't feel like what he saw, the people he saw, were doing a good service to all of that. So he kind of lost interest, but he started getting involved in politics. He got elected county auditor, got involved in real estate and the ability to read abstracts and titles and things like that. He did feel like he needed to serve in the Civil War, and so the Indiana Volunteers, one of the regiments, he followed them, and in those days, it was 90 days, you know, so it wasn't anything like today, where you sign up for 2 years. In the Civil War, you signed up for 90 days or 3 months. And anyway, he didn't see any real action, but he did, they guarded the railroads for the Union cause. He was a believer in the abolitionist cause. He came back and he got elected to the Indiana State House of Representatives. And somewhere in there, he heard about the RLDS Church and its Amboy conference in Amboy, Illinois, and so he attended, and he reconnected with the church at that point. He became all in. He also moved, him and his wife, they lived in Sandwich, Illinois, which is a kind of a central part in our history, in our church. And he became really good friends with Joseph Smith III. Joseph Smith III, as you can see, was 9 years younger than him. So Elijah Banta was kind of an older brother, but he became a very close friend and a personal confidant to Joseph Smith. And part of the reason for all of that was because Joseph saw Elijah as being a kind of a man of the world that had a lot of experience. He had been, like we said, a laborer, a coal miner, and such, a farmer. He was a builder. He built some homes. He was civic-minded. He had political experience, a veteran of the Northern cause. He was a persuasive person. He was also humble, very humble and self-deprecating. That's because Elijah Banta had a stutter. And the only time he didn't seem to have a stutter was when he was preaching. So, but he made fun of himself with regard to his stutter and that sort of thing. So, and he did it with humor. So he was, I mean, what's not to like for a young man like Joseph Smith III? Elijah Banta was also a very generous person. I don't know if the estate from his dad gave him a lot of money and land, but he seemed to have a lot. He helped, let me expand the household here. The Banta household was a central place for Joseph Smith III. He hung out there. It was his place of refuge. It was his place of peace. It was his place where he described, and you'll see Marietta Hodges there. That is the famous Marietta Walker. So his wife, Emmeline Hodges, her sister, younger sister, was Marietta Hodges. And Marietta had gone to school with Joseph Smith III. So they were kind of contemporaries and knew each other. And Elijah Banta was kind of the favorite uncle of the older guy. He actually funded Marietta's education, and encouraged her to go to higher education. She had been actually married to a Civil War vet who died of a sickness, and I can't remember whether it was before or after all of that she went on to school in, I think, St. Louis and some other places. But that was all funded and supported and encouraged by Elijah. So he was generous in that regard. Let me stop sharing just for a second because I don't want the Zoomers to see nothing but a slide. So, Elijah Banta, when Joseph Smith, back in 1866, he got called to Congress in Washington, D.C. There was an Ohio congressman that wanted him to testify about the Utah Territory and the laws that they were contemplating over the Utah Territory. Of course, that's where Brigham Young had brought all the Mormons, the Mormon trek of the LDS dispersion. And And I guess they wanted to hear from Joseph Smith III. You know, what he thought, what was his recommendations. And so Joseph brought, who else? Elijah Banta with him. So it was Joseph and Elijah off to Washington, D.C. Joseph Smith III made a comparison when it was Marietta Walker's 66th birthday, I think. It's either that or 77th birthday. Anyway, he made a comparison that in those early years, being in the Banta household with Elijah, his wife Emmeline, and Marietta, to him, that was what Jesus must have felt when he was in the Lazarus household with Mary and with Martha and Mary. It was his place of refuge. It was a place of stimulating discussion. It was a place in which they bantered and could share openly, and he could formulate his ideas. And Elijah Banta was passionate and pushed him in that regard. But it was a place of stimulating discussion, comfort, good food, and sanctuary. It was a place of peace. When Joseph Smith's first wife passed away in 1869, that same year he got remarried to Bertha Madison, and Elijah Banta officiated the wedding. So Elijah was right there from the beginning. Joseph Smith, if you know anything about Joseph Smith III, he did not want to build the church that his dad had. He wanted to run away from that. He had been rocked by the violence that had seemed to follow his dad's church. He had seen the bodies. In fact, Marietta Walker also did. She remembers her dad holding her up so she could look into the casket and see Joseph Smith and Hiram, and it affected her. Joseph Smith wanted the reorganization to be the peaceful church, not the violence that seemed to be following. And so at every point, he wanted to distinguish us. He wanted to distinguish us as the peaceful Latter-day Saint Church, and when we called ourselves the Reorganized. And Elijah Banta was right there with all of that, and encouraging it as well. But Joseph Smith was reluctant to give his blessing or even encourage this gathering that everybody was calling for. Everybody wanted to gather someplace. And Joseph Smith, all he could think of is Nauvoo. Nauvoo was not the place he wanted. And Nauvoo was gone. Chicago hadn't come yet. So there was a need for people to move from Sandwich, Illinois, where there were no jobs. People were struggling. And like I said, Chicago wasn't there for them to move off towards Chicago, because Nauvoo was the big city on the river. And so they needed to. Everybody was clawing for that. Elijah Banta had this vision, a very powerful, passionate vision, in which he believed that people like himself, people that had means, people that were rich, should pool their resources in some kind of a business venture to try to get business people to buy into it, and be able to buy up land and somehow make it available to the industrious poor. That's how they saw it. And in other words, instead of just giving money away, we needed to find a way to help people. And let me go ahead and make that my next. Going to come back to my slides. And so he formed in 1870 the Order of Enoch. And again, Joseph Smith wasn't truly on board with this. It was not a church organization. It was not even a secret organization. When you see a name like Order of Enoch, it sounds like a secret thing. It wasn't. It was more. It was a group of stockholders who had means, mostly men, but Marietta Walker was one of them, one of the members of that. But Elijah Banta when he came back from Washington, D.C. with Joseph, they parted company in Kirtland, and then he was a missionary. So he was not only a pastor in Sandwich, but he also a missionary that traveled the east, and later he traveled the west. Everywhere he went, he had this dream, this vision that he told people about. They wanted to create this stewardship organization of wealthy RLDS members for the purpose of bringing people of means and skill together to develop new land and empower hardworking families, the industrious poor, to build homes, find meaningful work, and create farms or businesses that they can call their own. In other words, have kind of a planned community, a planned gathering, so that you could get the lumber people there, so you could get the farmers there, so you could get the bankers there, so you could build a community that needed blacksmiths and all of the different things you think of for a community. Not just a hodgepodge, but you made things available and then made it so that people could pay off, like farmers, give them their 40, 80, or 160 acres and let them farm and let them pay that off and become the owners. Now, as part of all that, Elijah Banta, now again, Joseph Smith was not on board. And Elijah Banta, he needed to go find where this place would be. And so there were some competing locations. Council Bluffs was one of them. Northern Missouri was one of them. There was already gatherings of people in Davis City and Pleasanton. And so they had to find, where are we going to gather? Where are we going to buy up this land, as he was forming this idea of the Order of Enoch. And he was the president. He was able to get people like David Dancer on board and Israel Rogers on board. They were the other two really big investors. And so somewhere along the line, I don't know if it was somebody from Davis City or Pleasanton said, hey, you need to come and check this place out here in Decatur County, Fayette Township. You need to come and check it out. Now, I don't know, most of you probably don't appreciate this, but when I lived in Washington, D.C., and I would bring caravan students out from Spectacular for a week, and I also did that when I was a youth leader in Chicago, I was blown over by the sunsets. Just blown over. I mean, I had hundreds of pictures of sunsets, and then I get home and I go, these are terrible pictures. I mean, you can't capture it a camera, a sunset. But we had these amazing thunderstorms and then these thunder clouds rising to the sky, and then you'd have the sun shining on the bottom of these things, and I'd go, that is amazing. And then at night you saw all the stars, and you're going, holy cow, you don't get this in D.C., you don't get this in Chicago, you don't get this in Kansas City. This is amazing. Or even Des Moines. It was just amazing. And I've been in Australia. Pat and I were in Australia one time, and we went to Tiona Reunion Grounds, and they have a place called the Green Cathedral, and they said, we have the most awesome sunsets anywhere. And I said, oh, cool, so we sat and waited for the sunset. It was awesome. Bam, it was gone. I've been on cruises, awesome sunsets, bam, then it's gone. Here they last for 45 minutes, an hour. The colors keep changing, and I don't know if it's the jet stream over this place or what, but I've never been anywhere that blows me away more than here. Well, I somehow think that must be what Elijah Banta saw, because he came here and he said he saw the prairies stretched out and the vast horizons and the rolling hills and the meadows. And he said, this is fertile soil. This is where farmers could start. And he was excited about it. This was the place of peace for a community to gather. So then he had to convince Joseph Smith III. And so he badgered him until Joseph finally came out and got to see it. And he showed him, and of course Elijah was very passionate about all this, and Joseph finally gave his blessing. And then they went out and started buying up land. I've been to the courthouse trying to find, sometimes it's the buyer is the Order of Enoch, starting with a T, sometimes it's Order of Enoch, starting with one time it was something else that the Grand Order of, it was really hard to find the deeds when they all start with a different letter. But they were buying up land. They got as much as maybe 3,000 acres of land, and started to make that available for farmers and business people to come into our community. Okay, let me get back to my slides. Another element that so this area was perceived as kind of a peaceful place. The other thing that's really fascinating about Banta is that he was right dead center in the development of our very first seal. Now, in 1872, the church was established. I think it was established or made incorporated or whatever. What does it say? Incorporated. Yeah, incorporated. 1872. I think that's in Iowa. And Iowa had this requirement. If you were going to be, I think it was, if you were going to do formal documents, official documents, you needed to have a seal. You know, the kind you stamp on a thing. So the first seal was a real seal. It wasn't the kind of thing we see on the front of a building. And this is actually a stamp on a piece of metal of some sort. I don't know if it's brass or a sheet of, certainly not a sheet of gold. I wouldn't think. But it had the name of the church. It had a braid around the edge. And it had the lion and the lamb and the little child that leads them and the word peace. That was there. Now, it was Elijah Banta, Joseph Smith III, and Jason Briggs. Those were the threesome that put this together. But there was Elijah Banta right there with Joseph Smith III assisting in this. You might wonder, why a lion? You know, Pat just read the thing about Isaiah about the wolf. Yeah. We already had this favorite hymn that we all sing. You all know that favorite hymn that we sang at Kirtland? What's it called? Spirit of God likes fire burning. I don't know if it's still a verse in there, but if you go back to the original, there's a verse in which they needed to rhyme something with Zion. And wolf doesn't rhyme. So it's a lion. So we were already kind of prepared for a lion. So the lion and the lamb ends up here. And to me, the fascinating thing about this is, you know, we no longer need a seal. Seals disappeared a long time ago, but we still have the logo, and all the main elements are still there with the word peace right there. So it's kind of baked into our DNA for our church. And Elijah was a big part of that. So our identity is built right into our symbol. Let's talk about Lamoni. Elijah is thought to have been the person who promoted the name Lamoni. Its first promotion was in the name of this branch. We're called the Lamoni branch or the Lamoni congregation. Well, when the Lamoni congregation was formed or organized in 1871, Elijah Banta gave this rousing, motivational sermon in that conference. And it's believed that he was talking about Lamoni, the story of Chief Lamoni, and the idea of that being the story of Lamoni in the Book of Mormon. It is the story that embodies the Book of Mormon's most powerful story of transformation. It's the one where you have the chief who embraces the gospel of Jesus Christ, and they embrace Christ's peace so completely that they lay down and buried their weapons, promising not just promising, they make a pact that they will not pick up their weapons, they will not spill blood, even to the point of defending themselves. And so there's whole stories where they just lay down and pray while people are slashing away. And then the people that are doing the slashing are so disturbed by what they're doing that, you know, some of them become converted and want to know, what's this all about? So it's the premier story of peace. Elijah liked the name Lamoni for the Lamoni congregation, and so that became the name. But it was also a perfect name for a community of peace. And oh, by the way, this picture here comes a few years later, 1883. Elijah Banta built some of the first homes in Lamoni. I saw a picture of his own home, and it looks remarkably like the Dancer home, which we think of as the pepper mill, and Jack Ergo's house. And I'm going, wow, wonder if he built those homes. I don't know. But the homes that he built, some of the first homes in Lamoni around 1870, 1869, 1870, 71. But he was also the architect of the first church in this place. We called it the Brick Church. If you go back to the Lamoni Chronicle, you find all people had their funerals at the Brick Church. And so this was called the Brick Church. And it lasted from 83 to 1931. I saw someplace that it was not brick so much, it was brick veneer. And so the whole thing burned down in 1931. I remember my grandma talking about being in tears because they lived here and watching the church burn. That brick church could house 1,000 people in the upper floor and 500 people downstairs. So it must have been massive. Elijah Banta was on that committee. He also was a major contributor because he insisted on 2 towers, 2 bell towers that you see there. And people said, we can't afford that. And so he donated $1,000, which is a lot of money then, $1,000 to ensure that it would have 2 towers. It's believed that he thought that the meaning of the 2 towers was the twin Christian principles of grace and works. Or another thing I read suggested that it was a partnership between Christ and community. So he kind of pulls those 2 things together and sees them as equally important. But another thing that was happening around that time, at least by 1979, by 1979, it was determined that the railroad was being built and it was not going to go through Lamoni. And so the Order of Enoch, the businessmen in that, spent some time trying to convince the CB&Q Railway to swing down and come through here. And they did a lot of work. They donated money for that clause to the railroad, and they were successful in getting that come through here. But then the question was, the other thing was, the town center was about a mile south of here. There was a post office called the Sedgwick Post Office, named after a Civil War general. Also down there, south, about a mile or 2 miles, that's where the community had gathered. They called themselves the Colony. Crown Colony is named in kind of in reference to that. They're called the Colony. But when the railroad station came, it had to be where you see it now, where City Hall is. And so the whole town center kind of had to move. Things began to work up here. So the question was, what name is going to go on that? You know, once you move the train station up here, the post office is going to have to be up here. The depot is going to have a name on it, and Elijah Banta really wanted Lamoni. And so he pushed for that. He was a politician too, so he probably knew that if you have a 3-way vote, you have a better shot at knocking out the ones that aren't that have lesser, split the vote. So in his case, the 3 were Sedgwick, the Colony, and Lamoni. And Lamoni won in an election. And once it won, Banta went right straight to doing all the paperwork to make sure that Lamoni would be on maps, it would be on the railroad maps and the railroad schedule, that it would be on the name of the post office, and you'd see Lamoni on the depot. So that's the beginning of the name of our town, Lamoni, 1879. This is why 1929 is going to be our sesquicentennial, right? Is that what they call it? What's the 150th? Sesquicentennial. Anyway, 1929, celebration coming. 1979, we had our centennial. So if you wonder, wow, there's a lot of things happening, but that's the year we became Lamoni. Let's see. So one of the things that's kind of important in my mind is just think about that our town carries a name that's designed to remind us of peace, a town of peace. Elijah was involved in many other influences, so I think I'll just stay with the slides here. I told you already he built some of the first homes. He was a county supervisor here. He served as president of the school board. He worked to build a school here. He was a state representative in the Iowa State House. So he was also not only Indiana, he was also here in Iowa. He narrowly escaped being elected mayor in a write-in that he didn't ask for. He was getting up in the years, and people were, he was a very popular guy. He was actually the first board president when Rose Hill Cemetery was formed in the year that Lamoni was actually incorporated in 1885. And what I found fascinating is he also was on a committee to secure the Kirtland Temple. Joseph Smith sent him to Kirtland to be a part of this committee, and he wanted him on that committee because he understood abstracts and titles. And he wanted to make sure that we got all the stuff we needed to do so that the RLDS Church had the Kirtland Temple. Now, we don't today. We just sold it. But we could thank Elijah Banta maybe for all the money we got when we did sell it. But he secured it so that it could be preserved for visitors and church events. Even after his death, this is the Elijah Banta home. Even after his death, Marietta Walker was the executor and had to make decisions about what to do with his stuff and his home and things like that. The home was turned into a children's home. And so you've heard of it was not really an orphanage. It was a place where people could send their children if they just couldn't afford to raise their kids for a few years while they get their feet back underground. But it was also an orphanage. This is at the site of where the Courtneys live today. Whose home was that? The one that built Plotz or Mortimer? No, Plotz. Plotz. So it's the Plotz home. This house burned down because it was given to Graceland. The children's home had to shut down after a while because Iowa law wouldn't allow us to bring in kids across the state line, and it got to where they just couldn't do it anymore. So they closed it down, gave it to Graceland. It became a dorm, a men's dorm called the Gables. Lasted one semester, burned down at Christmas when somebody left their iron on. I don't know what they did. But anyway, and so then another house was built, and that's where the Courtneys are today. But if you look at this house, it looks very similar to some of the others along State Street. So his legacy kind of lived on there. I am, I'm all at the cemetery, so I have to show you cemetery, right? If you want to know where he is buried, if you go up the yellow boxed in area there shows the original cemetery from when he passed away. That's what the cemetery looked like. It only had one road going up. When you get up there to that first crossroads, that's where all the most important historic pioneers are buried. That's where you find Bertha Madison Smith. She's up there on the other side of the road from him. But that little square box in there is the Elijah Banta plot, and that's what his headstone looks like. Okay, I think I stopped sharing. Good. On this Heritage Day, I want to say one more thing. Much of history is documented history. When you read the history books, if you read the history books, you're going to read about how Joseph Smith III was a man of peace, and all of, you know, that the whole idea of peace being built into who we are, it kind of comes from Joseph Smith. But if you really look between the lines of history, Elijah Banta was there every step of the way. He was pushing Joseph. He was a soundboard to Joseph. He was a comfort to Joseph. His home was a place of refuge. There's no question that Elijah Banta was central in who we are today as a church and who we are today as a community. So on this Heritage Day, it's good to be reminded of the people who shaped our identity as a church and as a community. It's good to be reminded that peace has been woven into every fabric of our church, what we now call Community of Christ. You can see that thread in so many different things if you just open your eyes and look. Just going to Independence and seeing the auditorium or seeing our temple, you can't help but notice all the flowing curves that wrap around a community that are there the way nature shelters life. You don't see the jagged edges and the sharp lines and the tall things that say, my God is so big, and all the man-made structures. It's very flowing, very peaceful. In the welcoming change of our name, Community of Christ, it lifts up the two twin principles of community and Christ's peace. Even in our evolving church policies, if you look at almost all of them, some that I've disagreed with, and then I've had to look back later and go, well, they got that right. It's involving policies that have expanded our horizons to include those who were once unseen. Heritage Day calls us to remember, to pause and give thanks for those whose vision and labor gave us the community we enjoy today. Remembering is at the very heart of our faith. Jesus commands us, do this in remembrance of me. On this Heritage Day, we remember Elijah Banta. We give thanks for his vision, his labor, his friendship with Joseph Smith III, and the heritage he helped to shape. And above all, let us remember Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, in our prayers, in our worship, in our communion, so that we too may become a people of peace in our own day, just as Elijah dreamed for his.